Mark Saba is a writer, a poet, and an artist. He really bases everything on poetry. It's really his foundation. I start off the conversation by asking him if it's a good time to be an artist. With the internet, with pandemic, with civil unrest, etc. It's a very interesting response. We have a great discussion on his process. He's been doing it for more than 30 years. He was born out of Pittsburgh and what was happening there, and then he moved to Connecticut, where he's been for about 25 years, I believe. A very interesting discussion on the process of what to do with a blank page. He also has such a profound couple of sentences in one of his websites that I had to read it out loud, and I had to get his response on it, where he talks about, well, I don't want to give it away, but it's really one of the most profound things I've ever read before. And I applauded him for it, and we have a deep discussion about it. But Mark Saba, I think you're going to like this. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business and it lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration.
And my wife said, just go buy a new computer. So,
Wow. At
oh,
the
thank
very
you.
well, I guess that'll help in the long run for other things, I assume. If it's 10 years old, I mean, that's
Yeah,
ancient.
I tend to like to hang on to things. So,
Mm.
you know,
Very
anyway.
interesting. Well, it's great to meet you. We have a mutual friend, Tom Izzo, great guy, great, artist himself, great
Oh
musician.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I met Tom. Oh, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. Um, we were actually performing together. There was this thing called New Haven Works, and my neighbor is also a musician, and he asked me to read a few poems at this. It was a,
Wow.
it was kind of like to do a little music, then I had to read a poem, and then to do some more music. And anyway, Tom was involved in that also, so that's how we met.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, you do so many things, Mark. I mean, I consider you an artist. I mean, is it a good time to be an artist now?
Oh, wow, interesting question. Well, I think there are more opportunities now than there have been before. I mean, you can get your work out there in so many ways and
Mm.
communicate with people in different ways, but there's such a disparity between people who actually make money from doing any kind of art and people who are just doing it because it's something inside them they need to do. So, and I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. I think the more art, the better. I don't think we need to all aspire to be, making millions of dollars from it. We need to aspire to be communicating with other people. I mean, the reason that we paint or draw or write is, because we reach other people who've got similar feelings, and it gives them validity in some way, and it's a good thing. So I don't know. It's
Overall.
difficult. Overall, I think it's a good thing, although it's never been easy. So that hasn't changed. I don't, there's always a reason not to make art. Go out, make some money, do all those mundane things you have to do every day, wash the car, whatever. So you have to make time for it, and I think you find that it's worth it.
That's
So
very interesting. I just recently went to the Van Gogh exhibit, the immersive one where you're it's all around you and, I mean, his life, I mean, he dealt with mental illness, he dealt with many things there in Europe, and, the evolution of his art was just dramatic, but, I mean, what would Van Vincent Van Gogh have done if there was the internet? Would would he be able to get his work out? Would he have I don't know, would he have moved his ear? Would he
I
have
don't
been that way?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, he might have been able to reach out to other people,
Mm,
I mean, we're able to reach out to virtual strangers and sometimes, find some solace there. Um, yeah, in those days, I think you were probably even more boxed in with your art, You retreat to your room and people think you're crazy and weird. And if there's not another artist in town, then you're really crazy and weird.
right.
So, uh, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that would contribute more to mental illness. I mean, there's plenty of mental illness around today, but there are, like I said, there are those avenues to get help or just to find a community. You know, Interesting. Yeah, I often wonder. On the other hand, because he didn't have as many distractions as we do.
Right.
I mean, a lot of those old artists. I mean, God, what they did was miraculous. I mean, look at Michelangelo even. I mean, it's mind-boggling what they did. How he carved those things out of marble. I mean, he was able to concentrate on that all the time, every day.
Mm,
He didn't have to, check his email or, um, you know, update his Facebook page, and um, I don't know, or feel like he had to go travel somewhere. He probably couldn't even afford it. So that's interesting. What human minds can do when they really apply themselves and they have the time. Either they make the time or they have the time. It's usually beyond what anyone can imagine. And part of being an artist is making the time, I think. I know I've said that before,
mm.
but as I said, there's always something to keep you from doing it, you know.
Very interesting. And
Mm.
with the current, political climate and civil unrest, and we're hopefully coming out of this pandemic, are artists needed more now than ever?
I think the public at large will probably look to artists a little bit more now because they've had to reflect
Mm,
on, life. I mean, what's important. Um, we've had things taken away from us so quickly and so easily that we took for granted, like just being able to see your relatives or hug your kids or go visit grandma. I mean, who would have thought we could not
right.
do that? And maybe you didn't make enough time to do it before, but now you're realizing that you should have. So this, that obviously leads to a lot of introspection, and that's what artists do. They sit and they look inside and they find things there. So, I think you might have a point there. I think maybe people are more receptive to art because of the pandemic, you know?
I kinda see an emergence of more music, and, I remember I don't wanna liken this to, Vietnam. I kinda go back I was born in the late '60s, and so early '70s, when Vietnam ended, we had this kind of rush, and, just in New York City, you had punk, you had disco, you had hip hop, rap emerge all within, that city right after that kind of war, after that very
Mm,
downtime, plenty of civil unrest and plenty of protests. And, the artists fought back. They had something to protest about, to write about, to
hmm
sing about, to draw about, to paint about.
Yeah. I guess we're gonna see it happening.
Mm,
It's maybe too early to tell, but I have to say that I never considered myself a political poet, but particularly, towards the end of the Trump administration, I find myself finding it necessary that I had to
mm,
write, that I had to address some of these issues. I just saw the country going down the tubes real fast, and I thought I can't just be quiet about this. So um, I actually posted a video on, I can't remember the name of the organization, Writers Against Trump, I think it's called, with some, you know, more famous poets who organized. And we all posted our little videos
hmm,
asking people to vote, right before the election. And I was kind of surprised about how impassioned I was about it because I often felt like I couldn't make a difference really that way with my art or my poetry, but I think we can. I think people have ears, they're listening, they're looking for something, something to believe in, you know, take a moral stance, even with things like Black Lives Matter, you need
Mhm.
to, it's like we're at a moment, we're at a crossroads in history. I think you're right. It's sort of like it was at the end of the 60s. It's probably even greater. We've never experienced a pandemic like this that we can remember. I mean, my grandparents lived through the 1918 pandemic,
Hmm.
but that was so far out of memory for us that
Right.
we didn't we didn't think it could happen again, but here it did.
It
And then
certainly did.
and then you have all this polarization of people and this craziness that people think they have to be either this or that,
Hmm.
and the media feeding some of that. And uh, you know, I know, and I think most artists know that we're all kind of in the gray middle, and we want to connect that way, and we can talk about stuff, and that's just a natural thing. It doesn't have to kill us all, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
I agree. I took a line. I take a line from Joe Rogan. I'm politically homeless. I mean, I reserve the right to change my mind at any time, based on new evidence, based on new facts, that's
hmm
presented to me in a different fashion. So it's a very interesting time in our lives. And
yeah.
you're a writer, a poet, you're an artist, you're a filmmaker. I want to talk about each of those in a moment, but
hmm
how do you approach each of those the same way? I mean, what do you do with the blank page?
Well, it's interesting. I came to realize over the years that everything I do is a poem.
Hmm.
My paintings are poems. My novels are poems. The films I've made are poetry videos, and they're obviously another kind of poem. But yeah, I kind of look for the essence of whatever I'm creating. Um, this is why I think it all boils down to poetry, because poetry, the German word for poem is gedicht, means condensed.
Hmm.
So I take all that crazy information in my head and I want to condense it in a way to make it clear, not only for myself but for my readers or viewers. And that's what poetry does. So when I'm writing a longer piece of fiction, I don't want to use too many words. I try to I'm very concise in my writing, and in my painting I don't want to paint something that I don't think uncovers the essence of that subject. So
Hmm.
sometimes people say, "Oh, your paintings look so different. You wouldn't even know they're from the same artist." And I say, "Well, it depends on what I'm painting. If I find a certain style and I call it my style, but my subject doesn't agree with that style, I'm not gonna use that style. I'm gonna let the subject matter dictate it to me. It's the same thing I do with a poem, with my writing. I hope that answers your question. That's a little that's a little
No, I love
convoluted.
it. It's so your foundation is a poem. I didn't know it meant condensed. I immediately thought of the Mark Twain quote where he's writing his sister a letter, and the first line is, "I'm sorry this is so long. I didn't have enough time to shorten it."
Yeah. So there you go. See, I think a lot of writers constantly edit and rewrite, and that's the reason because to us, every single word is important.
Mm.
You reread those words and you think, are they necessary for this? If they're not necessary, get rid of them. Are they distracting from what I'm trying to say? Are they more about my ego than the story? Like about how, clever I am as a writer? Then no, you don't need that. But if it's integral to the story, then you need it. Um, and you do see poems that sometimes I see poems that are very long and rambling, and I think
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not really into that kind of poetry. I think that could be condensed to about one third the size
Hmm.
and say more than it does when it just keeps going on and on. Um,
Yes, say more with less. Now, your recent you have a couple of 2 novellas, Fire and Ice, and they seem a bit, uh, forgive me, but they seem,
I have it here.
very good. Yeah, let's talk about, so, a young Catholic boy out of Pittsburgh. I mean, is that autobiographical?
Yes.
And
A Luke of All Ages, that's the first novella. Um, I started writing that when my aunt died, my mother's sister, and it kind of struck me that my childhood was evaporating before my eyes. We had
Hmm.
spent a lot of time at her house growing up, and I just started thinking about where I came from. I've been living in Connecticut for 34 years, and I grew up in Pittsburgh. And I think Mark Twain probably had a similar sentiment when he was living in Hartford, thinking
Mm.
about growing up in Missouri, and
Yeah,
that's how he wrote Huckleberry Finn.
that's right.
Um, and maybe Marcel Proust had the
Hmm.
same experience. So I just started laying out, scenes from my childhood, and then I thought of what it meant to become older, to become middle aged, and all these phases you go through in life. And that's kind of what the book's about. And I wrote it not thinking it would ever be published, really. It was sort of more a therapy session for me. And I kind of just put it away. And then I sent it to this publisher, and he really liked it. And then there's another novella called Fire and Ice. So the two of them are in the same book. And that's not as autobiographical. It's just about all made up. But the one character did grow up, very Catholic in a traditional Catholic family and went to a Catholic school. And he meets this woman who grew up basically in the woods with her mother, who was homeschooled without any organized religion at
Hmm.
all. And the two of them meet, and they start seeing each other's point of view in these two different worldviews they have. And the woman actually becomes interested in Catholicism and converts.
Hmm.
As the guy is saying, I haven't been to church for years, I don't really go into that anymore. And I was just thinking there's value in both systems. There was value in the way that guy was raised. There were things he saw that she didn't see. And the same with her. And, the way she interacted with the natural world was much more important than he had ever considered. So that's my thing about meeting in the gray middle. I think we all have something to give, and we can all learn from each other. And you can't take the point of view that your way is always right. And that's kind of how we get into this mess that we're in. Um, so there's a little bit of similarity in those two books, but as I say, the first one is much more autobiographical. And I find when I do write that way that people respond to it very well.
Hmm.
I think the more you dig into yourself and into your particular situation, the more universal it becomes. And I think people are attracted to those kind of stories because, even if someone grew up in an entirely different part of the country with different socioeconomic background, little details emerge and they can relate to them. And we all have parents. We're all kids at one point. So that's what those
Absolutely.
two books are about.
But yeah, it's interesting that you at one point you said how people, they kinda dig in, I am right and that's it, and I'm in this box and these people are with me and you're not, and that's not how, it's not how we're gonna advance, and,
No.
it's also interesting you say about perspective when these two completely opposites meet. When I was a young child, my father's an Italian immigrant. He would send me to Italy by myself, and so at 10 years old, I meet my family over there, and Southern Italy has a very different way of living than
Oh yeah.
New Haven, Connecticut. And uh, not that one's better than the other; it's just different, and you get acclimated to taking naps in the afternoon and to eating, but you walk a lot so not people aren't overweight, and and men hold hand, arm in arm, and there
Absolutely. I know.
it's
I'll
just
tell you
very
what. When
different.
I graduated from college, I spent a summer in Abruzzo, where my grandmother came from,
Yeah.
and everything you just said, I experienced. I'm
Yes.
walking down. I'm walking down the street with this young guy I just made friends with. He puts his arm through mine, and I'm like, I don't know what this is
We
about, but
don't do
everybody's
that.
doing it, So I just kind of went with it, But I was no one spoke English in that town where I stayed, and I don't know if you knew Italian when you were 10 years old, but
Only a little.
yeah, I had studied it and I picked up a few things from my grandmother, but I remember thinking to myself, I spent the whole summer there, this little town in the mountains, and I remember thinking, this is not easy. Don't ever romanticize this
Right.
time. I mean, it's quaint, it's beautiful, the little sheep coming through the streets at night and everything, but um, I felt like I knew what it was like to be an immigrant, to be someone in a different country, in a different culture. Even though my grandmother was Italian, she had left there 50 years ago, and she was, an American Italian now. Um,
Sure.
but I, I just there's so many little things that are different. I really have a lot of empathy for anyone who comes to this country from somewhere else now. I mean, just having gone through that situation myself. I'm really glad I did it. It was hard, but I'm glad I did it. It was all my idea too.
Mm.
I wanted to go there. So yeah. So we both have something in common there.
That's right. Yeah, 2 things. One, the language. I mean, my father has also lived in the mountains, and even if I studied Italian, it really wouldn't help me that much. I mean, the dialect is so thick and it's so
Yeah, there's
different,
dialect. Yeah, but I think
it's
that when I was talking with people, they would kind of use standard Italian because they knew it.
right,
I
right.
started to pick up the dialect though,
Of
and
course you
as
did,
I
yeah,
did, they were very amused that I was doing that. I think,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, the Italians generally you don't need to try. I mean, the Parisians kind of have a different kind of reputation of where you gotta try a little bit, The
Yeah.
Italians, well, just kinda it's alright,
Oh yeah.
they know a lot of them used to work at hotels, so, w "Would you like to use the water closet?" They know some American English phrases.
Yeah.
And you're right, also, you can't really romanticize it because, every young man and young woman wanted to get out of there, "Can you
Hmm.
bring me back to America?" It's nice, everybody's friendly, but there's not a lot of growth, there's not a lot of future in these small towns, there's not jobs, so
Right.
it was, um, very different way of living, and you just learn a lot. Excuse me, like you mentioned in your book, when you have these 2 different cultures meet, and not that one way is better than the other, you just learn how others live, and you adapt that into your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I absolutely loved my grandmother. That's part of the reason I wanted to go visit her hometown. But I'm not sure she really understood why I wanted to go there.
Mm.
She would say stuff like, I came over here because they have a washing machine. Over there, we were washing clothes on a rock in the river. And by the time I was there, which was 1981, they weren't washing clothes in the river anymore. I mean, things had changed. And then I went back again with my family in 2005, and I was really surprised how much it had changed even
Mm.
more. It had become more of a tourist destination than anything, and with an Irish pub and all kinds of weird stuff, which I was kind of disappointed about. But
Right.
things change, and I don't know. It was such a learning experience for me. I'm not sorry I did it. Um, and I would always try to see things from my grandmother's point of view. When she came over here, and I actually wrote another novel. It hasn't been published in print, but it's called The Shoemaker, and it's about her family. Her father was a shoemaker, and when they came over here, and I wrote it after I had spent my time in Italy, so I wrote it from their point of view of being
Mm.
immigrants coming to this country when they came in 1920. So you know, I had empathy for that generation. That was a big deal for them. Can you imagine like going to another country, you never see your grandparents again because they couldn't afford to go back and
No
forth,
way.
and you never see the graves of your ancestors. You know, everything's different. The climate's different. I mean, can you imagine going to Pittsburgh at the time? It was all smoky and
Right.
the weather was gross. And, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, 3 Rivers. Yeah, my father got his first pair of shoes when he was, 12, so
Mm,
it's hard to, relate to that, as an
yeah.
American, and, there's still, he talks about when the Nazis came back in World War II, when they were retreating after Mussolini, turned back, his uncle, uh, got him and took him up into the mountains because we gotta get out of
Hmm.
here, because they're coming
Yeah.
through again. I have no relation to that. I can't understand that, and my peers certainly can't. It's very different. So I wanna talk about so you left a country like that and kind of the inspiration of you making something like The Shoemaker. So
Hmm.
you kind of like, at what point do you decide to turn this experience into words?
I actually thought about. I had an experience when I was in my 20s. I lived in California for a couple years, to me, California is a different country. I
Yeah,
don't know
I
if
was gonna say that.
I don't know if you've ever lived there, but
Yeah,
I mean, when you first land, it's like, oh, how pretty, everything's nice,
sure.
everybody hugs each other all the time, food's good. But it's like you slowly realize that you're an Easterner,
Yeah.
and you're always going to be an Easterner. So that's kind of what got me thinking about my grandparents coming over here, plus the time that I had spent in Italy. The idea of moving to a different part of the world and thrown into this like cultural milieu, which is totally different than what you're used to. And also about changing gender roles. So I thought of, my wife and I, my wife worked very hard. She's still working, and how our situation was different from our grandparents, and how when they came over here, even my grandmother got a job as a seamstress. I don't think she had ever worked back in Italy like that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that was kind of like a big deal. I mean, and they came over in 1920. That's when all the styles started changing. They didn't have to wear those long dresses anymore. And like,
Roaring 20s, yeah.
yeah. So I started seeing some similarities in my life and just dealing with how to deal with these changing gender roles and also their lives when they came over here. So the book actually goes back and forth between my situation and theirs.
Hmm.
So some of it takes place in California and all the things that this guy's experiencing in the novel, and then some is in Pittsburgh and how this Italian family is experiencing, for instance, getting their first car, and not knowing what to do with it, you know. Um, and then the great grandfather, the shoemaker, how he's so uncertain all the time about his family, about how they're gonna survive, how they're gonna live. He's got this daughter who's my grandmother, who's like very rebellious, and like
Hmm.
doesn't want to get married right away, and um, yeah, so that's what I do. I find these areas that are like have some tension, and that's what I write about. So
But
the
how do you
shoemaker,
know sorry,
the shoemaker is actually I made it available as an ebook on Smashwords if anybody's interested.
please.
But it's not published in print, but you can get it as an ebook.
At what point do you realize that you're going to turn what you see and experience into a book? That kind of point of others will like this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure others will like anything really, but anything I write, I look at any point in my life, what's keeping me up at night? What am I obsessing
Hmm.
about? What can't I stop thinking about? And why am I thinking about it constantly? Because there's something I need to discover there. There's some tension there. There's something that needs to be explored. And I just have faith that other people will have you know, the same issues, the same things they're thinking about they might want to explore. So then I write about it. And then when it's done, I move on to something totally different. Um,
That's
yeah, so
fascinating.
that's what I've been doing like for the past almost 40 years now.
It's fascinating to me because even when I had the idea to kind of start this podcast, excuse me, my throat, and
Mhm.
I said I love talking to people. I love talking to artists like yourself, and I just have questions about the process and how they work. Will others be interested in hearing this? Is is what ultimately I fought with.
Yeah, but I think if you're honest about it, that's what I think it boils down to is integrity. I think, as I said, if I come up with a story, if it's completely contrived, like okay, this story is going to sell. I'm going to write about this and that.
Hmm,
It might sell for a while, but is it going to be around 100 years from now? Are people going to care about it? That's the view I take.
interesting.
I'm not really interested in what the vagaries of the marketplace are at this current moment, or what publishers happen to like. And as I think people that enjoy my books, and the reason they enjoy them is that they find something that they can relate to, and something real in them, and that's what drives me really. I mean, I haven't made $1 million off my work, but every now and then I get a nice little note from someone saying, I really enjoyed your book, and that keeps me going.
Hmm.
I'm sure I've made a connection there. I kind of distrust the marketplace. I distrust putting a price tag on anything like that on any creative work. There's just too many other forces involved that
Right.
influence that, and to me, it's not. I spend I pour my heart and soul into these things because I think they're honest, and I want them to go out in the world in the same way. So, um, and to go back to your very first question about is it easier for artists these days? It actually, I think there's so many different ways to be published. You can publish things yourself. You
Hmm.
can publish with small. There's a lot more small presses. All my books have come out from small presses. Um, you can help with the marketing yourself. I mean, even with things like Facebook, you just tell your friends. And when I started out, if you wanted to have a poem in a literary magazine, you had to like find a literary magazine in a bookstore, read it, see kind of what they like. Then you had to send them the poems to the U.S. mail with a
Hmm.
self-addressed return envelope with a stamp on it. And then you might get a response in a year saying, sorry, we can't publish this, So that's the way it was. Now you can go online. There's this site called Submittable where you can submit your poems, like hundreds and thousands of venues there, magazines that use Submittable, and you just click a button, and then if they don't like it, so what? Just send it somewhere else. It takes another minute. you know,
Hmm.
it's kind of like what we always dreamed about, in the early days. It's like there should be a way to connect writers and readers. It's like we're kind of like almost there. We're getting there. The problem is though, there's just so much of it now because
Right.
because it's easier. It's just being flooded, and people can't really find what they want. That's a problem I'm trying to solve, like how to
Hmm.
actually reach people. I mean, the best way's always been word of mouth, but you try and you hope that there's other ways to make it easier too.
Yeah, I want to talk
Yeah.
about publishing in a moment, but I getting back to like your process. You wrote
hmm
something here, and I hate to read, but I need for you to comment on this because I just loved it. I reread it so many times. Uh,
mm
I let the vision. You're talking about your instance of writing and your poems, your essays. I let
mm
the vision find the right format as I try to free myself from the influences of my beloved teachers and literary forebears. Never
mm.
an easy thing to do. It is the only way to realize originality in my work. I think it is the duty of any living writer to write from the heart, thereby acting as a medium for the zeitgeist, a witness who produces what can only be produced by his or her individual circumstances in his or her time, free of self-consciousness and its attending egotism.
Wow,
Mark,
that's a
that's
lot.
wonderfully profound.
Yeah, you just reminded me of that. I forgot that I wrote that. Okay. I kind of was hinting at this earlier when we were talking about how all my different art forms are related. And even when I started writing, I just had this thing in my head. I don't want to sound like anyone else. I don't.
Hmm.
And there were some writers that I really, really admired, and I was always fearful. I don't want to sound like Hemingway. I don't want to sound like Mark Twain. John Steinbeck. I love those people,
Mm,
but I thought, how can I not sound like them? And the only thing I kept coming back to was write about your own experience, Mark. Write about how you see things, not how someone else sees things, because that's what they did. That's all they did. And one of my favorite writers, Gertrude Stein, who was a big influence on me when I was younger, said, "It doesn't matter what you write about; it matters how strong your voice is."
hmm,
And you could take some of the most famous stories in the world in books, and you boil it down to a sentence or two, and you're like, okay, you know, Odysseus, some guy goes out and meets some kind of weird creatures and kills them, and it doesn't sound like very much. And then you read it, and it's all about how the story is told because of the strength of the voice. And the reason the voice is strong is because that writer, that person, chose chose an individual way of presenting the story based on what that individual saw. and felt. And I think if we all do that, it's easier to connect in a universal way. It's kind of paradoxical, you know. You can't, you can't use a program on the computer that teaches you how to write, or we all write exactly the same way. Um,
Hmm.
because there are no two people in this world who are equal in that they've all experienced different things in their lives. It's just that's what life is. We're born in individual circumstances. Everything we see, hear, smell, touch, taste is different for every single person, and all those little impressions are always in your head and tucked away. And those are the impressions that I use when I write. Um, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
And
well,
I,
I just go ahead.
it's fun. The thing about egotism,
Mm,
that's a dangerous thing. Like, oh, this writing will sound better if I really flower it up here. If I sound more like Margaret
Lewis.
Atwood or something like that. And
Mm,
but then you have to say, is that you or is that Margaret Atwood who's writing this? I mean, who do you want to sound like? And that's what I mean about staying away from egotism, staying away from what you think is going to make this a good writing, good story. Don't think about that. Think about how you're writing it and how true are you to your own voice. That's all that matters. And then people will respond to it, I think.
acting as a
So
medium for the zeitgeist.
the zeitgeist meaning the time you're living in.
Right.
All the other writers that I mentioned, or any writer that you has written, it's obviously is written in another time, especially if it's really another time, like 50 years ago, whatever. And all those things that are going on in the world influence that writer, whether they know it or not. You know, I'm being influenced by all this COVID stuff. I'm being
Of
influenced
course.
by all the movements that are going on, by the polarity in our country. Those are affecting me whether I know it or not,
Right.
it's going to come out in our writing. You know,
How do you view the reader as you write? Are you constantly thinking, how will the reader interpret this? How will they view it? Where are they in this journey?
um, the only thing that I'm concerned with is trying not to confuse the reader.
Mm,
I'm trying I'm trying to put it down as clear as possible. I can't. I've given up on trying to control people.
mm.
Um, you know, I've raised two kids. That probably has something to do with it. But and now I have a dog, which is even worse. So, but um, yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously you don't want to bore the reader either. Obviously that's another consideration. But I think if you can be as clear as possible in what you're trying to say, hopefully it'll be clear enough to the person reading it. If you reread it and you're like, I don't know what I'm saying here, then no one else is going to know what you're saying
Mm.
either. You know, but I I don't think you can like expect people to be sensitive. Some people just aren't. Some people just aren't going to get stuff. No matter how clearly you lay it out. Um, so as I said, it's always encouraging to me when I get a note from someone and they they saw what I put down there and it was clear enough that they were able to respond to it. So I think I was successful. But I don't think I'm ever going to reach all readers. I don't think any writer's ever going to do that. I mean, just go on Amazon, look up any book, and you'll
Mm.
find a bunch of 5 stars, and there's the guy with the 1 star. There's always
Just
one.
stumped. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way people are. So
How do you feel about listening to books rather than reading?
I haven't done that very much because I kind of have a little bit of a attention deficit, I think.
Mm.
And I even when I'm reading, something will strike me, like I'll start thinking about something else, and I'll look up and I'll have to think about that for a minute and then go back to the. But if you're listening to a book and you do that, then you've missed 2 pages because you were thinking about something else. So I'm not against that. It doesn't really work for me. Whoops, sorry about that. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
are any of your books available in audio versions?
No, they're not. I mean,
And if
I
they did, would you mind that? Would
no,
I
I wouldn't
mean,
mind because other people might be fine with it.
right.
I'm sure they are. Yeah, that would be great. I haven't even really looked into that possibility really, but I know, especially because people are busy, they like to listen to books, during their commute or whatever, and that's fine. I mean, I don't know. I might try it again. Um,
Yeah. I know I do a lot of that.
mm.
I just took a flight and, I read a nonfiction book and, well, I listened to it. You gotta change the verb there. Uh, is the publishing industry fair to writers?
It's probably never been fair to writers, but
Mm,
once a writer makes it big, then they're very fair because then
right.
they want to exploit it as much as possible. But they're kind of in a bind today too because they're in competition with self-publishing, small presses, university presses, other media that are gobbling up people's time. People have short attention spans. I mean, they're kind of like they don't know how to reach people either. And there's so many more people writing, which I don't think is a bad thing either. Uh, and I just know that compared to times past, they invest less in marketing books now than they used to, and
Mm,
expect the author to do a lot of that. And so this brings up another issue: is the reason writers write is because they tend to be a little shy and they can't tell their stories. They have to think about them, write them down, like
mm,
in a quiet room. And I mean, I've done a lot of readings myself, and you know, I tend to do well with them, but I'd rather people read my books, in a nice, comfy armchair by themselves. I think, I don't know, I think it's a more intimate experience. Um, so the idea of, writers marketing their own works, which is getting to be more and more important, it's hard for writers, I think, to do that. And some writers are more adept at it than others. Like I said, I can do it, but I can't say I really enjoy doing it.
yeah. Well,
Um,
it's not easy for an artist to, hang themselves out not only with their art, but, here it is in front of me. Please
mhm.
consume it. But let's go back to publishers. I mean, there's more writers than ever. Why there's the big 4, I believe. Is that correct? There's the big
Four or five, I can't
4 or
remember.
5. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean you don't see them why aren't they doing better? Why aren't they cultivating all these writers better and pushing it out? I mean, what's their excuse?
Well, it's the market. I mean, to print, to do traditional print runs, it's expensive to
Mm,
print books that way. Say you're going to print 500, send them out to bookstores, then either they sell them or they send them back to you, and you've lost a lot of money. So that's
right.
that's the traditional way. And when there were fewer writers, like people, they would look in the New York Times, the book review, and they'd
Mm,
probably recognize some of the writers, because there weren't as many around. Now there's hundreds and thousands of them, and they're all over the place. And you're like, I don't know what to read now, and you go in a bookstore, and half of what you pick up doesn't look very interesting, but they're just like fighting for people's attention. Um, so I don't know, and I know people who work in publicity in publishing firms, and they tell me it's all very confusing for them right now. They're not sure what's going on, how this is all going to shake out. Um, but I have faith that it's becoming a little more democratic. I don't think. I mean, the days when writers are going to make tons of money are probably every now and then there's one, but most of us probably aren't going to see that. Um, and I don't know, and I often think about my work, and okay, maybe people around Pittsburgh would like my work, because I write about Pittsburgh a lot.
right.
Uh, but on the other hand, then I think about the whole Rust Belt. People in Detroit might like it as well, and so in Cleveland and maybe even Chicago. I don't know, but it's. I mean, a publisher can't always take that kind of risk. Now I'm writing a new book now. It's a memoir, which I never thought I would do.
Hmm,
Okay, here we go about COVID affecting us. I don't know. Everything just seems more urgent now. I mean, I don't know why it seemed urgent that I should write this memoir, and I'm 63 now, so
hmm.
I feel like it's an okay time to write a memoir. And it actually is turning out very well. I'm really surprised, and I'm kind of learning a lot about myself. And I'm wondering if that's something that might have a broader appeal. I might try to send it to some bigger publishers. We'll see what happens with that. but it's the first time I've written something that I really feel like it should have a broad appeal.
Hmm.
Uh, it's basically, coming of age as a poet and kind of the different um, times that I went through of self-awareness and going down that path and how kind of resisted it at first and I didn't know about it and people kept telling me you're a poet, you're a poet. And I didn't know what that meant. There were no poets in my family.
Hmm.
I'm like, you can't make a living being a poet. It's like, so that's kind of the approach I'm taking with that memoir.
Is there pressure on writers to write something that eventually will make the screen?
Well, probably if you want to, there's probably more money in that. So
Hmm.
if that's your aim, do you know the Czech writer Milan Kundera?
I don't
I don't
know
know if
that
you've
name.
heard of him.
No.
So he once said, I think he said this in the 80s. He thought if a novel was to be successful these days, it had to be one that could not be made into a movie.
Hmm.
So, he was taking novels to the next level. It's like, okay, we have movies now. It's like we have photographs. You don't have to paint like a photograph anymore.
Mm.
Okay, we have movies. You don't have to write like that, like it's a movie. And I thought that was really interesting because that's the approach I took. I don't care. And, if someone can make a movie out of it, okay, but I'm not gonna write it in like a strictly chronological fashion and have this like arc of drama go on and all that crap. I don't know. I guess I'm not really traditional that way, you know. So
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, kind of the theme of the podcast is discipline and how people use it in their, in their vocation and their art. And it seems to me you're very disciplined, especially you talk about this memoir now. Seems like you're always creating, Mark.
I am, and if I'm not, I get very nervous and
Hmm.
and I'm not really fun to be around. Ask my wife. You know, I know that there have been times when I've taken maybe a few months off in between projects, and I'm just really grumpy. And and even I worked for 33 years at Yale University. I just retired last month as a
Ah.
medical illustrator and graphic designer. And people would always say to me, Mark, you're so centered and calm. What do you do? Like, do you meditate? Do you do yoga? I'm like, no, I'm a writer. And I make time to do that just about every day. And that's my drug. I don't need anything else.
Hmm.
So, um, I don't know. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but I think for people who tend to be creative, there's just so much coming in every day to think about. So many, there's just too much up in that head, and it needs to be released. And when you release it in a creative way, it calms you down. So I always need to, even when I'm in the middle of a project, I get nervous thinking about what am I going to do next? What am I going to do
Hmm.
next? So, and usually it's something very different from what I just completed. And sometimes I'll do a couple things at the same time. They're like night and day.
Really?
Yeah. And because like I said, there are just so many possibilities. It's now that I'm retired, like officially from my day job, I'm even more nervous than ever because I'm like, oh my God, now I actually do have time and I have to fill it up. So now I'm like writing every morning at this memoir instead of trying to pack it in the evenings. When my kids were little, I put them to sleep around 8 o'clock, and then I would write for 2 hours,
Wow.
and I would be really tired, but I would get geared up from the writing. So yeah, it does take a lot of discipline, uh, and hopefully, if you have a spouse or a partner, they understand that. I think my wife has come to understand that over the years. She didn't understand it at first. She
Hmm.
thought she was in competition with it, and I kept saying, no, no, you're
Uh,
not. Don't worry. But it's hard when you don't have that same passion. It's hard to understand it maybe. So I'm just sending out a message to all those out there who have partners who are passionate about what they do, just to let it go. you know, you're not in competition with it.
Very interesting. Well, you're
Yeah.
very unique and you're very You're very disciplined. I enjoyed talking to you today. Thanks so much for your time. I love
Yeah.
your process. I love your discipline. I love your work. When I read off that one excerpt there, I mean, I just had to sit back and just kind of ruminate a bit on it. And I wanted to share that with anybody listening. And thanks. So tell us, Mark, how can we get in touch with you? How can we get some? We didn't even talk about your paintings.
Oh,
Uh, I've been. They're on your website, so I've been
yeah.
through
There's
them.
one hanging back
I
here right
see
now,
that. Yeah, there's one there as well. Yeah.
and there's one
Are
on the
are most
easel.
are most writers painters?
I don't think so. No, I've known a few, but I actually was painting before I was writing. I've
Wow.
been studying art since I was 10 years old. When you grow up in Pittsburgh, they chose two kids from every fourth grade in the city to attend Saturday morning art classes at the Carnegie Museum.
Wow.
And it was funded by the Carnegie Foundation, so it was free. So we had art classes every Saturday morning, 500 of us in the music hall.
Wow.
And it was a really highly, highly disciplined classical art education. It was a privilege to be there. If you were acting up, you were gone.
Hmm.
So, and I did that from the time I was 10 years old till 18, till I graduated from high school.
Wow.
By the time I was 18, by the time you were in high school, the classes were smaller. They had cut it down, so you had to be invited back every year. But it was free every year until I think you were in 10th grade. Then it was $100 or something for the year. So, it was next to nothing really. So I always had that art background. I went to college and I decided to study pharmacy. That's another story. I was in the pharmacy school
Sorry.
for a couple years. I enjoyed science, but eventually I got over that. That was at the University of Pittsburgh. Then I transferred up here to Wesleyan University, and that's when I really started writing. I had a teacher there who really encouraged me to be a writer and made me see that's what I was. And how did I get on this topic now? What was I?
I just asked I just asked your background.
Oh, my
Behind you
background, the art.
painting
Yeah,
versus writing.
yeah. So, yeah. So, people say that my writing is very descriptive and evocative, and I think that's probably because of my visual art training.
Hmm.
I tend to see a lot of things that other people don't see and write them into my work here. So I think it's helped me really. It's a good thing. But I don't know that many writers that are artists, but I've known a few of them. Uh, so then I have to decide what am I going to do, write or paint.
Do both.
Yeah, I know. Now I have a little more time,
Right.
but it's always been kind of a struggle to fit them both in. Yeah.
The other thing, like, I couldn't find you on social media.
You couldn't
Like,
find me. Hmm.
I did a
Uh,
search, like, do we have an Instagram page and,
I do.
YouTube?
Instagram. Oh, well, Instagram, I'm under Saba Sardo.
Ah, I see.
So,
Okay.
and because my grandfather was from Sardinia, so Saba.
Ah, I've
My
never been
name
to
is Sar.
Sardinia.
Yeah, my name is Sardinian, Saba.
Ah, yes.
They have a completely different language there,
Yes, I know they do.
and uh, and
White
that's why.
sand beaches.
Yeah, and they have beautiful beaches. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you what, when you get away from the coast, it's a very different
Yes.
island.
Island mentality, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
My cousins, served military there. All my Italian cousins, they
Mm,
have to be in the military, and a couple of them were stationed there in Sardinia, and they went
yeah,
on about it. They loved it, but well, very
yeah.
good. Maybe you could send me those links. I'll put them in the show notes here. So how can people get in touch with you? How can they get your work, your poetry, your music, excuse me, your
Uh,
books and your paintings?
uh, you can go to my website, which is marksabawriter.com, and my email address is msaba@snet.net. So that is also on the website under the bio information. So you can get in touch with me there. The books, I mean, you could look up my name on, Amazon if you want to give them the money, and and they'll come up. But you can also, I mean, if you contact me directly, I could send you a signed copy of
It's on the
most of the
website.
books.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that, yeah.
Um, my Facebook page, I don't remember. I mean, I could send you the link, but
Please. I'll put
Yeah.
them in the show notes. Well,
All
Mark
right.
Saba, thank you so much. Absolute delight talking to you. I wish you continued success, and maybe the next time we see, we can have another discussion and be face to face. We're in the same state, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, right, right. And we'll banish COVID and we'll take advantage of that. All
Very
right.
good,
All right.
Mark. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Be
Okay.
well.
Okay. Bye-bye.